Good morning and a good Yor and a good Yom Tov. Ayin Beis, we're up to volume 3, literally 2 pages from the end, 3 pages. We're on page 1474. The end of the paragraph at the bottom, 1474. There's quite a complex and heavy paragraph, which I'm going to review and summarize now. So firstly, context. The context of all that we're discussing is essentially an in-depth, concentrated, and deliberate contemplation of the Nefesh Elikis, of the divine soul, during Shema and Baruch Shem Kved Machusei Leilam Vod, contemplating on divine unity. Liyachde Yizbarach, which means both to unify the divine, but also to exclusivise, I don't know if there's a word like that, exclusivize the divine as being the only true reality. And that, of course, requires a lot of contemplation because we have an existence to contend with. We live in a world that claims that it exists, and not only that it exists, that it's the center of the universe, namely not only our ego, but just the very existence itself is dictates and it declares its own value. So to appreciate God requires, in a world like this, with all the concealments, requires a lot of effort to so-called I don't say the word disqualify, but in order to make a case against the value and the power of physical existence, or just the mere existence, to realize that God is its true existence. That takes work, that takes exertion and effort and a lot of contemplation, because as I said, what's obvious to us, what comes natural to us, is our own reality. So to come to appreciate divine reality is this contemplation we're discussing here. Now, as I mentioned a number of times, all this is based on the Maimer Mika Shem Elokeinu HaMagbi L'Sheves from the Alter Rebbe, Sed Chanukah Tovkuf Samach Zayin, printed in Torah with an explanation. And then the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which further elaborates the same beginning, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. And as I said, we will learn both of those inside. We learned some pieces of it here and there I quoted, but we're going to learn it because it'll help us understand both what we're learning here, and most importantly, help us understand the continuation, because the Rebbe Rashab does not end the story, at least not in writing, in Ayin Beis. And the Nakuda is that in order to impact the animal soul, whose natural tendency is to take care of itself and not necessarily listen to the divine soul, those are the words from Torah. In Ayin Beis, the way he phrased it was, he said, I'm looking at page 1466. How could the soul affect a bittul, a sublimation, a nullification of the animal soul, when it is, as I just described in simple English, it's in the full intensity of its own yeshus, of its own being, and its own survival, its own needs. The exact opposite. Not only is it neutral, it serves itself. So suddenly so to educate and train it to be directed toward godliness seems like a real difficult effort. And that's where he began. We have to understand what Krishma is. Yechud Elah and Yechud Tata of Shema and Baruch Shem respectively. In Shema itself, when you break it down further, it's Hashem Elokeinu and Hashem Echad is Yechud Elah, Yechud Tata. And that was the whole discussion that we were in the middle of, in understanding there's higher unity, the lower unity, with the higher unity being that the divine is the only thing that exists. Das Elyon, the perspective from above. And that's technisch, that there is an existence, but the existence understands and appreciates that it's directed toward and should be subjugated to Elokus. And he explained these two levels of Yichud and these two levels of Bittul, especially since we're considering Yesh Ma'ayin, that existence is Yesh Ma'ayin, not Yesh Mi Yesh, which tells us that the Yesh and the Ayin of the Creator, is not commensurate and nothing in common with the creation. And number two, it's not impacted. There's no Shina in Ispilus, as we learned over the last pages, with the example from the Neshama Beguf. And yet there is a dimension of the divine that manifests within existence, Mamala Kalalman. Even that's not impacted, at least not the higher levels. And again, the details were discussed earlier. And then there's the divine, like Shevav Kalam, that's beyond, completely not impacted. Ni Hashem Le'Shanisi, even the Oyer is not impacted. So as a result, this is all part of this contemplation. That as the divine soul contemplates, this will be the forces, the arsenal that it will use to ultimately sublimate the animal soul, which we have not gotten back to at all yet. Even though that's the direction it's headed, we know that from the Torah from the Alter Rebbe's Maimon and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimon. But we'll get back to it when we have to get back to it. Okay. So then he connected these to the two dais, as I just said, Dasa and Das Tachton on page 1472. And what distinguishes, how does the divine manifest in a level that relates to existence when there's divine is really beyond existence? So that's the parsa. In the microcosmic is the parsa, the partition between Atzilus and Biyah, and also between, in Atzilus itself, between Bina and Mides, between Keser and Chachma, as we spoke about Prasois. And in macrocosm is the Tzimzum, between Atzilus the Klolos, a macrocosmic Atzilus, and Bria the Klolos and Biyah, meaning with the levels after the Tzimtzum. And the broad terms, he said also the Kav is like the air that relates to existence, and air itself before the Tzimtzum is the air that's beyond existence. So it's the pass of the Tzimtzum that separates the two. And finally came the last piece, and that's what creates the two different levels of Bittul, because we have two different perspectives, two different levels of the divine. There's the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and there's the ayin of the Yesh Nivra. The ayin of the Yesh Amiti is, all its role is to express the divine. That's all its goal is. And the ayin of the Yesh Nivra is the ayin has already gone through Helam, a Tzimtzum, in order to relate to and be and engage with existence. And that leads to Bittul Hayesh. The paragraph that we learned on Friday, the last year we had, the last class, comes now that this is the two perspectives, Mitzad Ishtalshus. That's how we see it. But then Mitzad Eibishter, it says, Kel Deus Hashem, that he includes both Deus. So even though they're two opposite perspectives, yet he in Kel Beis earlier he said, Sevel Beis he contains both, even though they're opposites. So he explains how is that possible. Because in Atzmus, there's Shneim Emes v'Shneim Yechodim be'Ein Sof, and both are on that same level of Bittul, of the Ayin, the higher level of Ayin. Why is that the case? Because he explained in his barley ill, because the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti is the Eir HaKol Batzmusei, is the energy, divine light that is encompassed when one with Atzmus. The Ayin of the Yesh Amiti is the Aura that so-called exits and enters into the domain of what we would call existence. Yitziv is Galus Matzmusili Lahavis Sayesh. And how does that take place? That's the parsa. Take away the parsa, and you don't have a distinction between these two levels. And that's indeed the perspective from Atzmus. Since he says that that's what the whole partition is only from the perspective of Elamus, of existence, and the cosmic order. That's where the Tzimzum has an effect and creates these two levels. To the level of the Oyer that it relates to existence, which is Richig Vavdola, and therefore allows for the creation of a Yesh. And that's why there's only Bittul HaYesh. Avalagaba Atzmus and Sof. I'm reading inside. Tzimzum v'parsa ein a milo master klal. The Tzimzum and the parsa do not conceal or cover at all. V'lo yesh kan shum hefsek v'dichu klal. So if you're spinning on the other side of the curtain, meaning from Atzmus' perspective, both these levels are equal because there's no part that parsa does not conceal at all. And he goes further. And it seems that that's why you are the force that conceals, or you are found in the concealment because the hesed itself is koyach einsef, like the koyach hagili. So in a way, he's saying 2 points here. One is that there's no concealment compared to Atzmus. More than that, the concealment itself is Atzmus. Just as Atzmus has the power to reveal, Atzmus has the power to conceal. So though he doesn't say it as 2 points, but if you think about it, it is 2 points, one going further than the other. Obviously, point number 2 is a higher one, and therefore it encompasses point number 1, that there's no concealment. Not only is there no concealment, he is the power of concealment. Like he says, so you could have said that it doesn't conceal because nothing is concealed in the eyes of God. It's like you think from the perspective of energy. So even though matter doesn't feel the energy or doesn't see the energy, but the energy sees the matter. But it's even more than that. Here, the very concealment is also part of koyach atzmus. So therefore, based on that perspective, atzmus perspective, so therefore, even the second level, which is only a second level, only from the perspective of a parsa, of a partition or a tzimzum. But if there's no parsa, no tzimzum, so the second level is just another divine expression. 2 equal expressions of the divine. One that remains only God's expression, the other that will, from our perspective, be affected by a parsa, but not from Atzmus' perspective. So it's mamish kamoi ha'oira kol b'atzmus b'chinas ayin shel yesh amiti. So even the lower level of ayin, from our point of view, and everything that exists is bittul mitzias mamish from the perspective of Atzmus. So here you have that Atzmus therefore contains both deis. And this is the meaning of ani rishon v'ani achrin. U'mibil odi ein elikim. I am the beginning, I am the first, and I am the last. And mibil odi, without me, ein elikim, there's no elikim. She explains ani rishon, ani achrin, the ani. This
Umibal
is
odai. Umibal odai. Ein elikim.
Mibil odi. Okay. Ani is the letters ayin. The ayin that we're talking about, there's 2 levels of ayin, right? Ani rishon, ani achrin. The yesh beis b'chinas ayin from the yesh amiti, and the ayin of the yesh the elamis. Those 2 levels of ayin are 2 levels from our point of view. And that's he calls the ani rishon is the ayin of keser, the ayin of the yesh amiti, like he said earlier, that's one of the meanings of ayin. The ayin achrin is the ayin of malchus, which manifests the yesh of Nevrayim, but by the Eibishter, it's ani rishon v'ani achrin. That kol b'shaveh. It's all equal. It's only from our point of view it's not equal. Ru atu ki ani anihu beis b'chinas ani shneim shavim, because I call miyuchad b'atzmus yizbarach. And the reason for this is the end. You said below die. Okay, mepnei below die ein elikim. What does that mean? There's no elikim, because there's no ein elikim here. It doesn't mean there's no God. That's the simpler meaning, and also seems obvious. What do you have to say that for? Here he's saying more than that. There's no elikim from the word hamaster umafsiklal, like he said before. Why are there no 2 levels? Because there's no concealment and no interruption. So from that point of view, just like the first ayat, there's nothing that exists but God. So from the second ayat is also the same thing, from the perspective of Atzmus. Kel Deus Havayah. But we still need to understand what about our perspective, because the goal in the Yachid, a second. Remember, the Yichud we have to create is a Yichud that we should also experience this. And here's the interesting thing. We are being told this is the perspective of Atzmus. But from our perspective, it does begin with two tracks, with two approaches. So we're going to discuss this. It's not over yet. He's going to continue now and explaining further. So why is it called two levels? So we're going to come to understand that everything is correct. There is the two levels, there's one level, and it's all ultimately going to interface into one seamless fusion. But at the end of the day, because he wants a dir b'tachtenim, we do need to begin from our point of view that there are levels. If there were no levels, if we saw it the way Atzmus saw it, then there'd be no avodah altogether. Then what's the whole purpose of creation? The purpose of creation is to create a created reality where there's a yesh, and the yesh works hard on becoming bottled to the ayin.
Yeah, you
And
forget
bitla yesh,
more.
yichud tata. And then will come a higher level of yichud elah. And then will come even a higher level of kel deis havaya, where yichud elah, yichud tata become one. But we have to.
That's it. Nein, ich habe gesagt, verschreiben, was. Okay, wo gehst du jetzt?
Hey, Shlomo, yeah, shut your microphone off.
Rabbi Jacobson just did it automatically.
So bottom line is we need to begin, because that's the whole point of creation. If, as I said, Atzmus, all this it does not achieve anything. Atzmus sees it this way before anything happened. I mean, there's no such thing as before, really. But if you point from the perspective of Atzmus, then there's all this, that we don't exist from that point of view. Atzmus wanted an existence and wanted us to first experience our existence, and then from our existence, we should come to realize through a contemplation that the yesh hanivra, like it should be bottled to the ayin of the yesh hanivra, then a higher level to reach the level of ayin amiti, of the ayin of the yesh amiti, and then to reach the level of the yesh amiti's perspective where both are equally one. But that's the process. So I am giving a bit of a taste of what we're going to learn later. Well, we will learn it. We won't learn it. In Ayin Beis, I don't think it's completely spelled out. But as I said, with Ayin Beis, together with the Mittler Rebbe's and Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, it basically will come down to the fact that we'll reach this third level of understanding how they become one. But you can't reach there, as I've said, without going through the first level. Because God did create a parsa. The Tzimzum and parsa are not an illusion. When we say them, it's that Atzmus, it doesn't conceal, because it's his very power. It doesn't make the Tzimzum an illusion. It just means, from his point of view, the Tzimzum is just another power of his. But from our point of view, it's a real reality. But as I said, that itself needs to be understood. In other words, can God see it through our eyes as well? And obviously the answer is yes, because we've said that even then certain levels of Elikus, ha'ara da ha'ara, and especially when it comes to Maisa Tachtenim, is impacted by us. Either impacted or affected through our Aveda. Yes, he chooses it. He doesn't have to be affected, but he does ultimately affected by it. But bottom line is, when we're talking about from the point of view of creation, the process of creation, the first track, we're not talking Aveda right now. There, Ani Hashem Leishanisi is completely beyond. And now even furthermore, both levels are equal, because for him there's no pasa, meaning the pasa has no impact, because the pasa is number one, it doesn't conceal. Number two, it's the very power of Atzmus as well. Koyach Atzmus, Koyach Hester. Okay, so that sums up a bit what we've learned in the last paragraph, which now leads us to the next paragraph. But I will stop if anybody wants to ask questions. It is a complicated subject matter. And I did advise last time when we learned that I suggested to everyone to read it again as many times as you need and process it as much as you like. And I'll be happy to answer, but there will be things answered as we go along. So keep that in mind as well. We're not finished. We're not out of the subject matter. He's continuing to develop it. And as I said, we will need the help of the other Maimorim to help us understand it better. But nevertheless, if anybody wants to ask something right now about this, please do. And I'll be happy to clarify or defer to what we're going to learn later.
It just dawned on me that we love Hasidus because we want to learn about the Eibishter. So we're really learning what the Eibishter wants us to know. It's like a slightly different thing. We're not learning the non-Atzmus parts that we call God are what the Eibishter wants us to climb on and know. It's like it's a slightly different look from the Hasidus. And today's Tanya also means the aura, the aura, it's interesting.
Well, look, there's many angles to this. The Ayin Beis is very is a particular approach, but there are many Maimorim. They all talk about this, some of them very differently, but there are many aspects to understand Yichud Hashem, Achdus Hashem, or as he said, the mitzvah liyardei has many meanings to it. And I'm going to bring them into the discussion as we go. And right now, I don't want to confuse matters. So I want to stick to the text and just read Pshat with as much understanding as we can and what the Rebbe Rashab is saying. But as you shall see, when I will bring some other places that will help us understand this. But again, the best way is to go first through this. But at the end of the day, there are many ways to look at all of this. You can look at it completely through the eyes of creation. You can look at it from the eyes of the divine within creation. You can look at it from the eyes of the divine beyond creation. And then you can look at it from the eyes of the Atzmus. That's beyond creation, like what we're discussing now. And all four that I just mentioned are all legitimate. They're all real perspectives. That's called Avodah. That's called growth. This is not a black and white type of process. It's exactly that. It's a process. It's just like if you're really teaching students, no two students are going to understand the idea exactly the same way if you're teaching it properly. If you're teaching just technical facts, yes, A, B, C, D, everybody knows there's a certain amount of letters in the alphabet, Ayin Beis, 22 letters, etc. That's technical things, that technical data. But if you learn it in a way of understanding and integrating and personalizing and applying it, no two people are going to understand it the same way. That's the best sign when you're really teaching properly. What you want to do is give people the tools to appreciate godliness in different ways based on where they are at in their lives. And that is, of course, the biggest challenge. But before we get to that application, first we have to understand the concept. So that's what we're learning here. But remember, the goal of it is not to establish a black and white, this is it. It's ultimately going to be where you're at and how you fit this into where you're at as you grow. And I just mentioned four perspectives. There are a lot more than four, to be honest. The truth is here right now, it's talking about two, Das Elyon, Das Tachten, and now a third, which is the joining of the two. So we're going to learn a lot more about this. And so when you do ask anything or you do think about it, just keep in mind, are you thinking through let's put it, using the example I always use, are you looking from the art to appreciate the artist? Are you looking from the artist's point of view as he invested himself in the art? Are you looking from the artist's point of view as he's beyond being this art or beyond being an artist altogether? Or are you looking from a point of view that's completely beyond everything and not even beyond being an artist? The whole thing is like, so there's a lot of ways to look at, you can contemplate, take a leaf, a grain of sand, a flower, anything, and you can contemplate and discover the divine in it. That's a certain particular way of appreciating godliness. There's other ways as well. There's ways directly through existence, and then there's ways through beyond existence when you start realizing everything is just a reflection of the divine. It doesn't affect the divine. So those are levels of the divine that are beyond existence, and so on and so on. I can go on and on. So it's critical when you think about this. If you're going to think of if you're thinking, I want to understand from your point of view, you have to know which vantage point you're looking at. Are you standing in a valley? Are you standing on a plateau? Are you standing at the bottom of a mountain, middle of the mountain, or on top of the mountain, or even beyond that? And all of them are legitimate from that vantage point, from that perspective. Just keep that in mind in the whole, but responding to what you commented, Tzvi, about the knowing of God. Remember, at the end of the day, without God revealing part of this revealing this to us, we wouldn't have this knowledge as well. Yes, there's certain things you can come to even without any revelation at all. Pure seichel of a person can come to understand and extrapolate that creation didn't create itself. But how far can you really go without assistance or without the siyua, without revelation like Ata Haresela Das by Matan Torah and other forms? So a human being can reach a certain point even without any teacher or text. But we also have Torah as a text, and that's also going to come into play when we talk about Torah. Torah is God's gift to us that illuminates and gives us a blueprint, gives us a CAT scan of God's mind. Part of learning Chassidus, when we learn Chassidus is giving us this as well, is giving us this information. So not that everything we learned could not have been somewhat calculated or somewhat deduced from human logic. Surely you could definitely have that, but here it's a combination of both, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay, any other questions that before we continue?
It's all still under what God wants.
Go ahead, what?
I just finishing up. It's still all the great examples, which I really like the way you explained it. It's under what God is letting us work on and know and make chidushim b'chulu, but it's all under His plan. What it could be trillion, infinite amount of things that we don't know about God, but this is what He wants, and even no matter how we get.
Yeah, but remember, there's something to be said about Avodah Momata Lamaila. He also created us in a way that we could innovate, and that there are things that we could add and contribute that, so to speak, were not revealed from above. You have to keep that in mind as well. The Avodah does add a chiddush, which we'll talk about. We have talked about it already with Einoid, and not just Einoid. In general, there is a chiddush that we add, because if not, then at the end of the day, what was accomplished? Even from God's point of view, there's something that we add. So there will be that. It's not purely playing out a script that God gave us.
I have a question.
It's like revealing deeper dimensions of Atzmus, so to speak, is something that we as partners, but that's not for right now. That's a discussion of its own, which we'll get to, because it's all part of the bigger picture. But we'll get there as well. Right now,
I
keep
focused.
Das Tachton and the Keldeya Savaya, where they become one from the point of view of Atzmus.
I'm waiting already for 5 minutes. I'm apologizing if I'm cutting. I still have a very hard.
You're gonna have to take that up with Yitzchak.
I was waiting before Tzvi. Yitzchak, it's okay. I hope so.
We'll give everybody equal time. It's fine.
Okay. Everyone knows that Yitzchak is our beauty. So I have a very hard time to understand. What does it mean, the bottom line? I heard everything that you said, that there is a chiddush, otherwise what's the point? But how is it possible that there is a Metzius, an entity, without Hashem? I don't understand it. I have a hard time with that.
Who says there's a Metzius without Hashem? Where does that say anywhere? I've never heard that before.
You just said before that we have to say that there is a chiddush, because
but
otherwise...
you didn't hear the end of the sentence. I said we're not going to discuss it now. I'm going to discuss it in its right time.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And also, I referred you back to Parshas Vayikra Tzav Ayin Hey, where he talks about it somewhat. And there's more places in Ayin Beis where it's discussed. We have talked about this more than once, just for the record. Here it's not directly, I don't want to discuss it now because it's going to detract from what we're learning here, but we'll get to that as well.
Okay, we talked about it. We only mentioned that there is a problem. We never explained it. Okay, so you
that's
say...
not correct. I beg, I need to, with all respect, we did discuss it. Not now. This could be 5 years ago, 3 years ago.
Okay. Thank you.
So, thank you, Rav Shlomo. I did reread this paragraph, and I actually reread the citations in Tzav and Vayikra about the Parsos. Just FYI, but
the Vayikra and Tzav is not the Parsos. That's more Avodah Tzera Geveya. The Ikar Tzav is not Parsois.
I read the other citation too about Persas. Forgive me.
Oh, okay,
I
fine.
read them all. Just to be clear, I read them all.
Okay.
My question on this paragraph is that I get it. We're looking at this from the Eberster's the perspective of Atzmus, and from his perspective, it's all one. My question is, and you say that he created the Das Tachton so that we could, have our avoida. We would have to retrace the steps as you say. But what my question is, how? It's beautiful, and we have a vote, but how could it be otherwise? Meaning to say, without a tzimtzum, there can't be this our perceived other existence. There's just this infinite light that is overpowering, just like Nadav and Abihu went into the Kodesh Kadoshim, and they expired. It just like the Abraham says, the Moshe Rabbeinu, you can't see my face and live. So there had to be a tzimtzum so that we could exist. We could be in our own skin,
Obviously,
if you
absolutely.
will.
That's why there is a Tzimzum, correct, for sure. So what's the question?
Well,
Of course there's a
he
Tzimtzum.
could have.
God created a Tzimtzum. Absolutely.
I know, but you said he could have made the world such that there was no tzimtzum, there were no persas, there was not das tachton. He could have created a world like that. Of course, he could do anything. So I'm not coming to challenge you, because the Eberster Atzmus can do whatever he wants. But in the context that we understand Atzmus, how could we tolerate that without the tzimtzum?
You misunderstood what I said. I said God could not have done anything. That's what I said. He didn't have to create anything. If Das Tachten would be meaningless and just an illusion, I said, then everything loses any value. God could have done nothing. My point is that was the opposite, that Das Tachten actually is a reality from our perspective. From Atzmus' perspective, it's all part of Koyach Atzmus. But Koyach Atzmus on its own didn't have to create anything, frankly. I never addressed the issue whether he could have created existence without a tzimtzum. That's another discussion. Okay. Obviously, he wanted it to be al pi seichel, and that's why he created it with a tzimtzum and so on. But I didn't talk about whether he could have done it without a tzimtzum. That's not all what I was addressing.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for
clarifying. Now, as far as, I will say this, in volume 2, and this is critical in the whole discussion, a big part of what we're learning now began when he asked the big question, how can existence post-parsa, he actually asked it that way back in volume 2, that biyah, not atzilus, biyah. And same thing with, in general, hishtalshus post-tzimtzum, how can it experience a divine reality pre-tzimtzum when entire existence is predicated on the tzimtzum? Seems like a contradiction. That Atzmus is not affected by the tzimtzum, and Atzmus sees it all as one Maika Mashmala. That's obvious. Atzmus is not affected by the tzimtzum. Secondly, he is the power. He actually created the tzimtzum. It's just another extension of himself. So even though it's concealed, it's still God's concealment. So the question is, from our point of view, how could an existence that could not have existed in that powerful infinite light before the tzimtzum, how could it ever experience it? This was a very prominent and powerful question asked in the middle of volume 2. Ultimately, the answer is we're transforming the tzimtzum. Since the tzimtzum, as I just said, is the power of Atzmus, it's not it's not an airtight reality, meaning it's not just concealment, period. Its concealment is in order to reveal, and the revelation before the tzimtzum was in order to transmit through the tzimtzum into our containers. And through our avodah, we can transform the tzimtzum to the point of even ein oid, that the tzimtzum itself reveals the helam ha'atzmi, the koyach hamaster, the Gebrish himself, the power of God's power to conceal.
Beautiful.
One second. I'm not just speaking to you. I'm speaking to the whole class here. It's not just a response to your. I'm just giving you the whole context here. So the point I'm making here is that when we understand that aspect, that's the whole driving theme of the transformation of the tzimtzum, which is so critical of the whole process, is ultimately that when the nefesh habamis is, of course, a post-tzimtzum reality, because the nefesh habamis, as he actually in volume 2, he said that tzimtzum in human beings is the nefesh habamis. because it's a concealer. And on its own, it cannot, it defies God. It defies godliness. And yet, through the Hizbonenus, the contemplation of Shema and Baruch Shem, the Nefesh Elikis can convince, can educate and train the Nefesh Abamis, which means the Tzimzum to appreciate also godliness, because the Tzimzum itself is godliness, except it's unknown to us at this stage. That's ultimately what the steps that we, as you put it, Yitzchak, the retracing from the bottom up, from das Tach, from existence to das to Yechudi Tata, Yechudi Law, and ultimately the union of the two. Okay, I hope that helped.
Very much.
Good. Okay. Are there any other questions before shall we continue learning? Okay.
I take it that the Rishimu plays a role here, because that was this trace of the Or Lifnei Tzimzum and Or Bli Gvul, and that when we are revealing godliness and ultimately using the Hester to show that is ultimately Atzmus, that it connects with that, our ability to reveal Atzmus in the lower world, and that's how we make this Adira.
Well, the Rishimu is two things. It's the root of the containers. And if you remember, the Rishimu, he said, is rooted in the Helam Atzmi, higher than Oir. So in that sense, yes, absolutely. Tzimtzum and Rishimu, just for the record, usually go hand in hand. The Tzimtzum part is the concealed part. The Rishimu is the Koyach HaGvul part. But the Rishimu in this context is rooted in the Helam Atzmi, or the Koyach HaMastir, as like he calls it here. The Koyach HaMastir, Koyach HaHester. So in that sense, yes, and that's why the Rishim is rooted higher than the Oir, than the Kav. We learned this earlier in this volume, right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So now, new paragraph, bottom of the page. And as I said, this is all based on the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, page 382, if you want to know exactly where. But the Rebbe Rashab is adding plenty here. That's not specifically stated there. We shall see that later. So now ask the Rebbe Rashab a question. And these pages can be found if you want to follow the text at ayinbeis.com. Ach tzarich lahavin. According to what we just said, that from Atzmus' point of view, there's no two levels of ayin, because no parsa. The parsa means is does not have any. Does not conceal anything. The bottom of page 1474. So ach tzarich lahavin. According to this, we have to understand the lefizeh. Well, however, we need to understand the lefizeh according to what we just learned. There are no two real levels of ayin. They're both one God's power. So he has the power to reveal, the power to conceal. They're both batul betachlis, complete bittul, kelo chashiv, not bitla yesh. The yesh is only when you talk from the perspective of the nevroim and say the shtalshlis. There's no two levels of ayin. Va'kol b'chinas ayin echad. It's all one level of ayin. Hainu b'chinas ayin shel yesh amiti. The ayin of the yesh amiti, that the yesh amiti, Atzmus, is expressing himself. And his expression consists of what will be seen by the creation as two tracks. But from perspective of Atzmus, it's one ayin. So then why do we say, Omau inyan irishin v'ani achren? So why does the pasuk say an irishin v'ani achren? Talking from God's perspective, there's no two levels of ani. Obviously, you could answer that he's talking from our perspective, but clearly he wants to understand it from God's perspective. Ani arisha v'ani achren. Or maybe what I just said is part of the answer. Let's hold up on that. That's the question. And frankly, it would also say, why Kale Deus? According to this, it's one Deus. It's not two Deus. It's two Deus again, from the perspective of those that are affected by the parsa, by the partition and the Tzimzum. That's one question. The Gam, additionally, if you're talking from this perspective, there's no creation at all. You just said that even the Yesh, being that there's no parsa, no Tzimzum, the Yesh from Atzmus perspective is completely bottled betachlis, just like the Oyer HaKol B'Atzmuseh. V'haloi ksiv, and doesn't it say, Bereshis bara Elokim, God created a world. Bereshis bara Elokim, God created an existence. So he's not necessarily asking the question whether this is a dimyon, whether this is an illusion or not. He's asking a stronger question. He's asking, the fact of the matter is, you're saying from this perspective, so why are there two levels of ayin, ani rish and yachin, and there seems to be no existence at all? Bereshis bara Elokim, God created a world, meaning God chose to create a world. So he sees a world as well. So how do you reconcile all this? Obviously, we're dealing here with very subtle and profound matters, but we'll try to figure it out. But that's the way he posed the two questions here. Let's see how he explains it now, right? I don't want to overanalyze the question because I'd rather see how the Rebbe Rashab develops it. Well, I'm sure glad to say that Ayin Beis doesn't end right here. That would leave us hanging. At least the Rebbe Rashab does continue and address these questions. And in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, he doesn't discuss this question. He just says it as a fact that mitzad Atzmus, there's all one. I don't think he actually addresses this question unless I miss something. Maybe there's something there, maybe hinted to. We'll see. But the Rebbe Rashab definitely does address it. And of course, it goes down to the big question. Does God see existence or doesn't he see existence? According to what we learned before, you could hypothetically say there is an existence and it's not an illusion because God, the Tzimzum is also an existence. God created a Tzimzum. That's also not. It's just that for God, the Tzimzum is just another revelation. So you would say from God's perspective, there's a world, but the world is divine, just a divine existence. From our point of view, the world has its own yeshus, its own consciousness, its own independence, and we need avodah to recognize the godliness within it. That would seem to be the obvious approach. But as I said, I don't want to overthink it because I want to see how the Rebbe Rashab develops it. But I do imagine that everybody's thinking about this, so that's why I'm just spelling it out a bit. So we have two questions on the table.
Where is the Mittler Rebbe saying it?
Are you part of this? I've mentioned the Mittler Rebbe maybe 50 times already. That all this is based on the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which is based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, Mika Avaya Lekenu HaMagbi L'Sheves Chanukah. Now I've given the page numbers as well, and it's posted on the group as well. You want to look it up.
Shlomo, I'll send you the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer again. I think I sent it to you before, but I'll send it to you again.
Acha Inyan Hu. So the answer to this is Dehine Beis B'chinas Ayin Hanal, because now these two levels of Ayin, the above mentioned two levels of Ayin. Ein Zeh Sha'ayin HaBeis, it does not mean that the second Ayin Hurak Hamshachas Ha'orem Ha'ayin Ha'alef, that the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, which means the energy, the divine energy after the Tzimzum and Parsa, that is diminished and is commensurate and tailored to creation, like Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia, that does not mean that it's Hamshacha from the first ayin of the Yesh Amiti, which is just a seamless field of energy. Like we said, only his Galus Atzmus. So it's not the Pshat that the Ayin HaBeis is like coming from the Ayin HaAleph, like a reflection of the Ayin HaAleph. Ki'im, hem Beis Madreges HaNimshachim Me'ein Seif Baruch Hu. These are two tracks coming from Ein Seif Baruch Hu. In other words, you could have learned Pshat that God, Atzmus, chose to express himself, and he expressed himself the Ayin of Yesh Amiti, and then from that Ayin evolved another Ayin, a lower level, that enters into existence. He says, no, both are coming from the same source, from Atzmus. So it's not Atzmus, Ayin Yesh Amiti, Ayin of Yesh Nivra. It's Atzmus and two levels of Ayin that emerge from it. Again, we're not talking about from the perspective of Atzmus. We're talking about what happens from our perspective where there are two levels of Ayin. We'll soon get back to Atzmus as we discuss it. So he's explaining that the two levels of Ayin are two different Beis Madregas, Hanim Shachim, Ein Seif Baruch Hu. V'hainu Beis Mini Hamshachas. Two forms of transmission. Ha'echad, the first, Liya is bechinas Ayin Mamish. The first is in order to be an Ayin Mamish, should actually be an entity that has no identity of its own. All it is, the reflection of God, of godliness, an expression of the divine. Shalamai legamri bechinas Yesh. It has nothing to do with the Yesh, with existence. Completely above it. Next page, 1475. That's track 1, Hamshacha 1. Hamshacha 2, Habeis, Vabeis. The second, Liyas b'chinas Ayin Hamokal Yesh. God chose to create another level of Ayin, and this Ayin is going to be commensurate to be a source for the Yesh. You're going to identify with it, engage with it. The Shneim Klulim Umiyuchadim Ba'atzmus Ein Sof. And both are encompassed and one with Atzmus Ein Sof. It's not that the number Ayin number 2 is a reflection of Ayin number 1, and Ayin number 1 is encompassed in Atzmus Ein Sof. Both of them are Miyuchadim Ba'atzmus Ein Sof. V'nivlu al yidei Tzimzum. And how did they actually become 2? Remember, in Atzmus they're 1. And Atzmus chose to create 2 things. The Tzimzum is the operative manner in which God actually separated them into 2. So now you have an Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. They both originate in their source, but they both originate and come as 2 separate Hamshachas. This doesn't mean, just for the record, that the second Ayin does not travel through the first one. It does travel through it, but it has, so to speak, its own relationship with Atzmus, if you wish. It's just like the neshama and the guf. The soul and the body are 2 separate entities. The body is not created by the soul, but it's the soul that brings the energy of the body to become a body. It travels through the soul, but they both have tracks, like Eris and Keli, mentioned before, the Rishimu and the Kav, 2 different sources. So the Rishima does come through this air before the Tzimzum, but it's a separate track, so to speak, that has its own relationship. In other words, if God said, I only want the Ayin, only only Gilui, you wouldn't have Kalim. You wouldn't have a root of Kem. You wouldn't have a root of Koyach HaGvul or Er HaGvul. So there's another thing that God did was, I have also a power to conceal, just like I have the power to reveal. Is sometimes the expression. His capacity to radiate, to reveal, to express, and his capacity not to express, to withhold, to refrain. And nivlu adei tzimtzum. So the tzimtzum separates between them, which actually seems to suggest that there's 3 things coming from Atzmus. One is the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, the second is the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra, and the tzimtzum, which separates. Unless you say that the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is part of the tzimtzum part, meaning the power to conceal is what creates the power to have a Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. That needs to be looked into a bit. But bottom line is, he's saying here clearly, he's adding something here. So therefore, you see here that it's true in Atzmus, it's all 1. But he explains now why it's called 2 levels of Ayin and not 1 level of Ayin, because it's 2 tracks that come from the Koyach Atzmus. Let's continue. I'll stop for questions shortly. I want to just finish the subject. The Pa'ulas Tzimzum Hu, the impact or the effect or the function or the role of the Tzimzum, are all good translations. The role of the Tzimzum or the effect of the role of the Tzimzum was shenivdol b'chinas ha'ayin habeis ma'ayin ha'alef. Is to separate between the second ayin of the Yesh Nivra from the first ayin of the Yesh Amiti, the ayin that is kol batzmusei. V'nasa b'chinas richuk min ha'atzmus. So the Tzimzum effectuates and actualizes what the second ayin should be, that it should be in a state of distance, meaning not the full reflection of the bli gvul, and infinite light of expression just of Atzmus itself, that this Oyer should already, this Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra should at least become something that is commensurate, something that you can, in the domain of being a source for a Yesh. Mokali Yesh. Okay. So what he's saying here is like this. He's not changing what he said earlier, that from Atzmus' point of view, it's one. He's just changing why then is it two altogether. But from our point of view, Rosh should be one. Why is it two? So he says because the truth is they're both one in Atzmus, but they're two. They're two different expressions that God ultimately chooses to do. And it's the Tzimzum that actualizes that separation between them. That's what he said here.
So
that
it's not
explains,
going
one second, just a second. That explains, I'm just seeing if he answers the questions, Ani Rishon V'Ani Achron and Bereshis Bara. Does he explain Bereshis Bara? Let me see a second. Okay. I don't know if he spells it out exactly. I'm not sure if he completely answered the questions that he asked or not. I would want to see if the Rebbe Rashab himself spells it out, but I would wait till we read more. So we're still in the middle of, let's just say this, we're still in the middle of the subject, we haven't finished it. But he has definitely made a statement here about these two levels of ayin, and there's all of the tzimtzum in separating them. Okay. Anybody wants to ask anything?
So that means that the Tzimzum HaBeis has nothing to do, the Ayin HaBeis.
1 second, what do you mean by tzimtzum HaBeis? I'm not sure
No. The Ayin HaBeis. The Ayin HaBeis is not coming from the Ayin Aleph. It's not a Ore from it. It's directly
That's the
from
words of the Rebbe
Eibishter.
Rashab. He said it's not a Ore, ma'ayin Aleph. That's exactly the words of the Rebbe Rashab, the last two lines on the last page. Yeah.
Like Gvul and Bli Gvul, right? Like Gvul and Bli Gvul. Two different from Atzmus.
He doesn't use the words Era Bli Gvul and Era Gvul. You could say that. I'm careful not to use it either because the Rebbe Rashab doesn't use it and it could be a lower level. I would use more the words Yecholte Lahoyer, Yecholte Shaloi Lahoyer, if you ask me.
Rabbi Jacob said, why can't we say...
Hold on. Let me just finish what I'm saying. It's more God's capacity to express, God's capacity not to express. That would be closer, I think, to what he's saying here, which will ultimately be Eira Bli Gvul and Eira Gvul. But he doesn't use Eira Bli Gvul, Eira Gvul, I think, for that reason. Because he's talking in the Koyach HaAtzmus here.
So this is higher than Gvul and Bli Gvul. Yecholes.
So if you asked me, he doesn't say Yecholes either. You asked me, I would lean more to Yecholte Lahoyer, Yecholte Shaloi Lahoyer. He doesn't say it, which I'm interesting why he doesn't say it. I'm not positive. It could be he's even higher than that for all I know. But it's definitely not Gvul and Bli Gvul, which is already, these are states. This is definitely speaking, but maybe it'll become more apparent what level exactly it is. It's definitely speaking a high level here, that's for sure.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Why can't we say that obviously from Atzmus' point of view, everything is one and everything is one, obviously. But the way the Eibishter created is that we should have the duality, just like we said, that we could trace the step, but that's not it. That he will be able to experience, bottom up through our avoda, and that's what gives them time. To say, in other words, that it's not it's of course he's Atzmus, he can do whatever he wants, but he chooses that he will be able to experience through our avoda the bottom up path.
Who said that's not what I said to him? Who said we can't say
No.
that?
I'm just saying, is that fair statement to say? I'm not saying that's not what you said. I'm saying,
I don't understand exactly what you mean. Are you talking about from our perspective or from Atzmus' perspective?
I'm saying from our perspective, obviously everything is one. And from our perspective, ultimately, they both are one. All I'm saying is one of the reasons that Eibishter created this duality or two tracks, not duality, but two tracks, is so he also be able to experience through bottom up, like through our
Who's
avoda.
he, God or us?
God
I don't know about that. That I cannot say. I could only say that we should experience him. That I know for sure. Whether he should experience us, I don't know. I spoke about this before. I spoke about God engaging with us and Aveda impacted by us and so on. Not sure what, I think I addressed this, but I don't know if God created two tracks that he should experience us, or he created two tracks so we should experience him. So I would hold up on that until we learn more. Let's see here. Okay, I see he's going to explain this further, but I'm going to stop here, simply due to time. So we're on the fourth line, page 1475. Any other questions? I'll be happy to take them. I'm going to stop here. The next section is going to explain this a lot more, I see. So I would also rely on that. I see it's going to explain these two levels of ayin. And with a mushal, he's going to give a mushal for it. Okay, pretty good. 1 second. Yeah, go ahead. Anybody?
Yes, two quick questions. One is that the Rebbe says here that Tzimzum separates the Ayin Aleph from Ayin Beis, but the Tzimzum, as we generally use the term, is a much, much lower level than what we've learned in, I think, volume 2 or whatever. There was Helam Atzmi, Etzem Or, Ayin, the level of traveling down to Or Ein Sof, and then finally getting down to a level of Tzimzum. There's levels of Or Esosphere, so the Genuzos, Lifnei Tzimzum. So all those levels, if the Tzimzum is what divides those two, are we saying in all those different higher levels in the Tzimzum that preceded the Tzimzum, dimensionally anyways, there's Ayin Amiti and Ayin Yesh are Batachlis a Yichud there because they haven't been separated by the Tzimzum yet?
So first of all, two answers to your question. First of all, in general, the before the Tzimzum is all Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and the after the Tzimzum, like we learned, the Kav, that's the of the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. So in those general terms, that is the Tzimzum that separates between the HaKolol. Everything before the Tzimzum is, in general terms, all encompassed within Atzmus. That's why you need a Tzimzum. And then the Tzimzum reveals the second Ayin, the Ayin that will manifest and relate to existence. That's answer number one. Answer number two, that even when you talk before the Tzimtzum, the levels, so the Rebbe has in Tov Shem Mem Hey, Yud Shvat, he speaks about that even though Chassidus doesn't talk about it very extensively, but there are places that talk that Tzimtzum before the Tzimtzum Arishan. In concept, you can say the very fact that anything comes from Atzmus requires some Tzimtzum. However, you don't call it Tzimtzum there. There you call God desiring it. But in concept, you could say subtly the mere fact that there's the legalis la'atzmai before the Tzimtzum, the legalis l'zulosei before the Tzimtzum also requires a certain type of Tzimtzum between those two levels of ayin if you're going to start breaking it down. But generally, we don't do that. Generally, before the Tzimtzum is reserved to ayin of Yesh Amiti, after the Tzimtzum is ayin of the Yesh Nivra. So those are the two answers to your question. If you go back to page 1473, I think he touched upon it as well in the parentheses. I'm looking at that. Still is the Klolus. Yeah. Yeah, that's in the before the Tzimtzum itself. Okay.
So in Or Ein Sof, lifting at Tzimtzum, those high levels higher than Tzimtzum Rishon that we talk about, the radical Tzimtzum, we were saying that the ability for Atzmus to lo lahayer and lahayer and lo lahayer is lo lahayer.
No, that would not be Tzimtzum at all. You're talking, once you're chelis, you're talking God's capacity, you don't talk language of Tzimtzum. There it's God's capacity, he can do whatever he wants. He has the capacity to do anything. So he has the capacity to radiate, capacity not. But there, it's all one. There's no two. As soon as you talk two, that's where you need a tzimtzum.
Which is he's have, as you said, but subtly.
So generally, it's before the tzimtzum and after the tzimtzum. Those are the two levels of what I just explained. Yeah,
right. But you traced it all the way back. You said in some places in Chassidus it does mention.
If that's confusing, then then strike it. The main answer is the first answer.
I thought it was
what he's explaining here. The before the tzimtzum is generally the ayin of the yesh hamiti, and the after the tzimtzum ayin of yesh hanivra. That you understand?
Yes. Okay. No, I found what you said was very enlightening. That he's have a kodesh.
What do you mean nisava? Nisava as in desire?
Yes.
I didn't mention that.
I thought you said that in some places subtly God's desire.
No. I never said that. No.
So what did you mean when you said subtly? Sometimes there's places that refer to a tzimtzum higher than the tzimtzum.
Then if you're going to start breaking down the levels before the tzimtzum of one level of earth to the next level,
yes.
So there the Rebbe speaks in Tov Shem Mem Hey Yud Shvat about tzimtzumim before the tzimtzum arishin, between those levels.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So stop here. Line 4.